Ladies and gentlemen, after 5 rounds, we go to the judges' scorecards for decision. Derek Cleary scores it 49-46. Chris Lee has it 49-46. And Richard Bertrand scores the contest 50-45 for the winner. And still, the undisputed UFC light heavyweight champion of the world, Johnny Bones Jones.
And with that, UFC 145 is in the books. Welcome, fight fans, to another great episode of Pound for Pound with Brian and David, the show that debates all things UFC. At this time, I'd like to bring in my co-host, David. How you doing today, David?
In the building, Brian. I'm doing fantastic today. What about yourself?
I'm great. Great fights last night and a great show today for the fans. In today's episode, we're going to cover such things as UFC 145, the debacle with UFC 146, and previewing Fox 3. You ready to get started?
Let's go.
David, as we mentioned, UFC 145 had some great fights. In the co-main event, we saw Roy McDonald face Che Mills. Did Roy McDonald make a believer out of you?
Oh my God, did this kid ever make a believer out of us? I think they said he's the 4th youngest fighter in the UFC.
That's correct.
And Che Mills came out looking like he was about to impose his will, like it was actually going to be a great match. And then Roy McDonald got his legs underneath him and just picked him apart, took him to the ground, and dominated Che Mills from there. It was easy said, easy done.
Yeah, Roy McDonald was supposed to be, he's being slated as the next GSP, and after watching him last night, I can see why. I mean, Che Mills came out, kind of stalked him down, hit him with some hard shots, and Roy McDonald kept himself composed, took the fight to the ground, and his ground and pound was nasty. I mean, he hit Che Mills with shots that I think would have easily knocked out any other opponent at 170, and I'd like to see Roy McDonald fight a top 5 guy next in the welterweight division, and I think that's what Dana White's going to give him. I mean, I think he proved something last night, and Roy McDonald's here to stay. He's serious contender.
Winner of Koscheck-Hendricks fight, maybe?
I like that. We're going to talk about that fight later on in today's show, but I mean, definitely, if not Josh Koscheck or Johnny Hendricks, the winner of that fight, definitely a top 5 opponent in that welterweight division. And of course, the main event of UFC 145 was the highly anticipated matchup between former training partners Rashad Evans and Jon Jones. What's up, David? What's with the snoring?
What, bro? Man, I'm still trying to wake up from that boring fight from last night. I can't believe how unexciting this fight was for me. Besides a few key moments with some elbows and some overhand rights from Rashad Evans, I think talk is cheap. They didn't live up to the talk that was preceded the match in the prime times and in all the interviews and press junkets. It was a lackluster fight, in my opinion.
I'm surprised to hear you say that, David. I thought it was a very technical fight. I think Jon Jones imposed his game plan well, which was use his advantage of reach and height.
Well, if he's a boring fighter, then he did a great job.
I mean, technical fighters might be considered boring fighters in boxing and MMA, but that's just a aspect of fighting. But David, I can't agree with you in that everything that was said up into the fight and in the promotion leading up to the fight, I thought it was going to be a lot more entertaining. I thought they were both going to go at it. I'm surprised Rashad didn't even look really to take it to the ground, but he wanted to stand with them. I thought he was going to have a big advantage in that aspect of wrestling.
I think that's just Rashad wanting to knock out Jones and send a message.
You're probably right. Yeah, you're probably right. But nonetheless, he ends up losing the fight. And where do they go from now? We've heard in the post-fight press conference, it's been confirmed that Dana White said Dan Henderson's next in line and will get the next shot at Jon Jones. And Rashad vows he's going to come back better and stronger, and he's only 32, and, he's still young in the sport. Rampage. So you wanted him to see Rampage.
I would love to see a Rampage Rashad Evans rematch.
I would too. I think that'd be an exciting fight. I think, they'd go at it, and it'd be a lot more entertaining than the first fight. Especially because Rampage won't be coming off such a long layoff.
And you need to give Rampage fights that he wants to be in.
Exactly.
We learned that last time in Japan.
Exactly, and that's all the controversy going on with Rampage right now, in that he doesn't think the UFC is giving him exciting fights, and he thinks he's getting shortchanged by the UFC. But, I mean, either way...
You got a job to do, you got to do it.
Exactly, and that's a whole different topic. But... Getting back to Jon Jones, Jon Jones will go fight Dan Henderson, and that'll be an entertaining fight. I think Dan Henderson's going to, once again, struggle with the length and reach of Jon Jones, and it'll be interesting to see if and when Jon Jones does ever make that leap to heavyweight and how that goes. But
Hendo's a lanky guy. I see it being an interesting fight. I would love to see someone challenge John Jones on the ground.
Exactly.
No one's done
Put
it
him
yet.
on his back. Put him on his back.
An Olympic wrestler, Dan Henderson, let's give it a go.
Right. So, for now, UFC 145 in the books. We good to move on?
We good.
With so many great fighters, David, in the UFC, it's only a matter of time before people start clamoring for dream matchups and cross-weight matchups. So I think for round 2, we should examine and go in depth about some of our dream matchups. What do you say?
Let's do it.
So, David, after UFC 145, we now know John Jones is going to fight Dan Henderson. And in June, we have Anderson Silva going up against Chael Sonnen in the rematch. Let's say, for example, Anderson beats Chael and John Jones gets by Dan Henderson. Would you like to see a John Jones matchup against Anderson Silva before a GSP matchup against Anderson Silva?
Oh my, okay, most definitely. Because first of all, both of them are lanky guys that like to size their opponents up and kind of get a feel, and then try and pick them apart. And I think John Jones wants to beat the best, and he wants to beat Anderson Silva desperately. I think deep down inside, he would love to, measure himself up against what people deem as the pound for pound greatest fighter in the world. And I think it only makes sense. I don't think GSP is as an exciting of a fighter, and I think that's why a Anderson Silva John Jones matchup will be much more exciting.
I think we could both agree on that, because I think a John Jones Anderson Silva makes a lot more sense than the GSP Anderson Silva based on just their body types. John Jones and Anderson Silva have very similar body types, as you mentioned, and I think that matchup's going to be great in judging how each one of them deals with the distance and the striking. I mean, I think John Jones would actually, for that fight, look to take the fight to the ground, while Anderson Silva would look to keep it standing. And that'd just be a great matchup, exciting matchup. And I really bet the UFC would not even have to put that much money into promoting that fight, because that's going to sell itself. But moving on, what else do you see out there as potential dream matchups in the UFC?
I think there's a lot of talk around a Frankie Edgar Jose Aldo fight.
That'd be great. Yeah,
I see that being an all-out war. Both of them just giving it their all, going at it, and just making it a swing fest. I think Jose would obviously want to keep it on his feet, and Frankie would look to kind of take it to the ground. But at the same time, he's got to worry about that black belt that everyone keeps talking about Jose has, and it'd be interesting to see.
The interesting thing about that fight is either one of them can move weight. Frankie can go down. He'd be easily able to make that weight cut. Or Jose Aldo's so big, he can even move up to lightweight. So that'd be an interesting fight. And as you said, who knows where it could go. I think it would go literally everywhere. But in that fight, I'd have to go with Jose Aldo, simply because, Frankie, even though Dana White has said he could be considered one of the best pound for pound, especially what he's doing at his size in the lightweight division, I'm sorry. I think I think Frankie's just ran into problems against every opponent. Gray Maynard, even Ben Henderson. He just gets caught, and it just changes the dynamic of the fight. We saw in the last fight in Japan when he fought Ben Henderson. An up kick really spelled the doom for Frankie Edgar, and it really, I think, was the main reason Ben Henderson won that fight. Similarly, against Gray Maynard, Gray hit him with strong shots in the first round of both fights, and that easily could have won the fight for Gray in either fight. So, Jose is going to definitely have better striking than either of those opponents, and I like Jose in that fight against Frankie Edgar.
Talking about striking, what do you think about a Jose Aldo Dominic Cruz fight if Cruz gets by Faber?
That's another great fight. That's a fight where I don't even think we'd see them on the ground for a second, because I think both of them believe in their boxing and stand-up skills, and that they're going to want to keep it standing and test each other on the feet. Again, like I said, Jose Aldo I just think is one of the best pound for pound, just at a lighter weight, and so he's not talked about as much. But, Jose Aldo is a beast. Anderson Silva has said if Jose Aldo was in the middleweight division, he would retire, So Jose Aldo, I think we're just now starting to see him come into form. And he's so young still. He has such a bright future ahead of him. He's going to be around for a long time, and I think his legend's just going to grow.
In that fight, I would just love to see that. I don't know if anyone's been watching The Ultimate Fighter out there lately, but Dominic Cruz is really annoying on that. And so it'd be great to see Jose Aldo shut him up.
Yeah, of course, Dominic Cruz is going to have to get by Uriah first in July, and that's going to be another exciting fight. But, there's so many, like we said, there's so many great matchups. Even Dan Henderson versus Chael Sonnen, I'd love to see, just to see who's better at wrestling. Both great wrestlers, both great size.
A lot of potential, yeah.
That's great. I think Dan Henderson has an edge in the stand-up. But again, there's so many great fighters in the UFC, so many great talents. I mean, these things are just going to have to happen one day or another. Good for round 2?
We're good. Brian, UFC 146 was the battle of titans, it seemed at one point. But then all of a sudden, Overeem tests positive for steroids and the UFC card is in jeopardy. What happens from here?
Well, first off, I think we could say this is all, we could put the blame all on Overeem. And I mean, is anybody really surprised that he tested positive? I mean, this guy tested 14-1.
Dude, I thought it was because he eats the horse meat, man.
No, I don't think horse meat puts your testosterone at 14-1 when an average man is 1-1. You know, I feel horrible for the UFC. You know, I think they had big plans for this heavyweight card in May, Memorial Day weekend. You know, heavyweight title on the line against a great opponent. And it just collapses. You know, we have a hearing coming up on April 24th to find out the fate of Overeem. But even before that, Dana White has pulled him from the card and thus given the biggest shakeup in putting Frank Mir now against Junior Dos Santos for the heavyweight crown, which I don't know where you stand on this, but I completely just disagree with this matchup. I know a lot of fans would disagree with this, but I think Cain Velasquez is more deserving of a rematch against Dos Santos, and it would be a more entertaining fight, seeing that they fought the first time and they kind of have a feel for each other, and Cain's not going to be coming off such a big layoff against Dos Santos and then recovering from his injury. But I think that's more deserving than a Frank Mir fight. And to be honest with you, I know we're gonna predict later on, but I'll give you my prediction now. Dos Santos TKO round 1. What do you think about this fight and this now fight card?
You know, I think Dana White was backed up into a corner and had to make a decision. Unfortunately, that decision was to put Frank Mir on the main card in the main event against Junior Dos Santos. I don't necessarily agree. I disagree with your idea of putting Cain Velasquez against Junior Dos Santos. The last fight that Cain Velasquez had was against Junior Dos Santos, and he lost. How do people want to see that fight again? If it was a 5-round war, yeah, I'd maybe want to see that again. But instead of it being like a 2.5 minute, I'm going to get grazed on my temple and fall down and get knocked out. Absolutely not, Brian.
I understand what you're saying, and I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me on this, but think about this for a second. Talent-wise, who matches up?
Out of your mind, Brian.
Who matches up against Dos Santos better?
Frank Mir broke Nogueira's arm the last time he was out there.
That's great, and he almost got knocked out by Nogueira. If Nogueira wasn't so willing to go to the ground and prove his dominance in jiu-jitsu, he would have won that fight by TKO against Frank Mir. Look, Frank Mir, I'm sorry, he's a great fighter, but his chin is not there anymore, and Dos Santos, he's going to just stand on the feet, box.
I'm going to make my prediction right now, Brian. Frank Mir, guillotine, 3rd round.
All right, I hope I'm going to keep this on record, and we're going to revisit this. We're going to have this on tape because I can't believe you just made that prediction, and I hope you believe that, and you're not just saying that.
I'm just pumped up right now.
No, but talent-wise, skill-wise, the better matchup that it's not going to have the same result of the first fight. I mean, Cain Velasquez, Dos Santos, it's going to be a much better fight. Cain's going to look to take it to the ground this time. Dos Santos is going to try and keep it on the feet again. I mean, it's going to go a little longer than what the first fight did back on the Fox 1 card.
I agree with you there, but just Dana White can't do that. If it was a fight that was interesting the first time around, of course, but Mir's coming off some impressive wins, and just Cain got flat out beat last time against Junior Dos Santos. So unfortunately, I think this is the decision that Dana White had to make. But I see where you're coming from.
You're right. I mean, yeah, you're right. Dana White was backed into a corner and had to make a quick decision. And I know he probably hurt a lot of people and people.
Mark Hunt, you didn't want Mark Hunt.
I don't think that was going to happen. I think even Dana did not even consider that for a second. But moving on, now this puts Cain in an awkward position in that he has no opponent. What would you do with the rest of the card if you're Dana White?
I'd move Roy Nelson up to fight Cain Velasquez and then give Antonio Bigfoot Silva a shot against Mark Hunt, man. People want to see Mark Hunt in that card, and let's give the people what they want. I
mean, the fans definitely are clamoring for Mark Hunt, but, I mean, and, Dana White, if you're listening, I mean, you should always give the fans what they want, and so if that's what they want, throw Mark Hunt in there. But I also would have to say, no one's considering putting Verdum in there. I mean, Verdum just had an amazing victory over Roy Nelson. Why not? He's sitting off waiting for a Brazil fight against Mike Russo. I think you should ask him to politely come fight in May, move his fight date up, and fight either Antonio Silva or Cain in the co-main event. So there's a lot of stuff you can do. They're going to have to move fast, but I think one thing that's for certain is Overeem's off this card, and his UFC future is in question now.
Yeah. What about this? What if we move Roy Nelson versus Mark Hunt?
You are on some Mark Hunt kick, man.
And then give Cain Velasquez Fabricio Verdum.
I mean,
that'd be fun.
Well. Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun. But obviously, the best one still would have been the original card. So we're just gonna have to now sit and wait to see what the UFC does with Cain and the rest of the heavyweights. But on another unrelated, or I guess related note.
Oh, related, yeah.
You have a big problem. Alistair Overeem. What do you do with him? I mean, what should the UFC do with him? I mean, do you kick him out of the UFC? Do you suspend him? Do you just wait and see what the commission says on April 24th? What do you do if you're Dana White with Alistair Overeem?
I mean, I'm curious as to what's going through Dana White's mind right now. Because first of all, there's that whole thing with Golden Glory and Alistair's promotional company, and he didn't want to come to the UFC, doesn't want to fight all the time in America, blah, blah, blah. And now it's like, Dana White, checkmate. You tested positive for steroids. You better do what I say. I'm all about giving second chances. I think Alistair deserves one. I'm sure a lot of these guys feel the same way. I think that he should be punished, possibly suspended, and have to sit out for a year before he can come back and fight.
Well, let me first start off by saying, I bet you this. Dana White is pissed. I mean, he probably had so many plans for this fight for Memorial Day weekend that just, are useless now. I mean, it's just a waste. So I think I have to disagree. I mean, I think second chances are horrible. It sends a horrible message to the rest of the fighters that, I can use steroids. If I get caught, hey, I'll get suspended, but I get to come back and retain my job in the UFC. The UFC, if they want to be a credible sport, recognized as pure athletes in the sport, they need to not allow steroids on any level. And he needs to make an example, and he needs to kick Alistair Overeem out of his company. I mean, Alistair knew steroids are illegal. Using this kind of stuff is illegal. Even someone like Chael Sonnen who's tested. I mean, these guys know it's this banned substances. You can't use this. It gives you an advantage against your opponent. It's not rocket science.
Why didn't he kick out Chael, though? I don't get it.
I don't know. That's why I don't know what the UFC is doing, and I don't know what their decision is going to be on Alistair Overeem. But again, if a guy tests for steroids, set an example, kick him out. It's not saying he can never come back, but kick him out. I mean, you got to be. This is a sport that's still growing, still trying to be recognized on a big, large scale like the NFL, the NBA. You need to make sure your fighters aren't testing for steroids and ruining cards like this. So if someone bought tickets to this fight expecting to see Alistair Overeem versus Dos Santos, they aren't disappointed in that fact that someone tested positive for steroids and now they can't see that.
Are we good, Brian?
I think we're good. Okay, David, for round 4, we got a great fight card coming up on Cinco de Mayo in East Rutherford, New Jersey. UFC on Fox 3. And I think this is a fight card they put together that for the fans that says, look, I know you were disappointed with the quick finish on UFC on Fox 1. I know you were disappointed with the UFC on Fox 2, lackluster
Give me the fireworks.
These are fireworks for the fans. Round 4 now. All right, David. In the main event, we have Jim Miller versus Nate Diaz. Who do you like?
Dude, I am a part of the Stockton slap contingent now. I, don't necessarily like the people as individuals in Stockton. I'm just kidding. The Diaz brothers are an interesting group, but, I'm a believer. They're fighters. They're gamers. And, I think they're going to come in there, brawl, and Diaz is going to come out with the victory against Johnny Miller.
I completely agree. The Diaz brothers are fighters. They come out there to do one thing, and that's fight and hurt their opponent. But Jim Miller is a fighter, and Jim Miller is going to come out there, and he's just more talented. I think he's stronger. I think he's more skilled everywhere this fight can go. So I like Jim Miller in this fight. I think third round submission, Jim Miller.
Okay.
Co-main event. This is going to be an exciting fight. We have Johnny Hendricks coming off his devastating knockout over John Fitch, fighting John Fitch's training partner and good friend, Josh Koscheck. Now, I know you're a Josh Koscheck fan, so do I even have to ask who's winning this fight?
Absolutely not. Josh Koscheck is going to come out here and go headhunt. He's going to try and knock out Johnny Hendricks for his former teammate, John Fitch. I think it's going to be a great fight. It's going to be a stand-up war, and hopefully it lives up to the expectations.
Sleep.
Yeah.
You said Josh Koscheck's going to be going out there to headhunt, and I think John Hendricks is going to be doing the exact same thing, headhunting. But ultimately, I do agree. I think Josh Koscheck's going to find the mark before Johnny Hendricks. Just more experience. I think he's a better wrestler. He could take it anywhere he wants. More experience. I mean, everything's on Josh Koscheck's side. But Johnny Hendricks has, put silence in doubters before, so he might do the same. But I have to agree, Josh Koscheck, I'm going to say knockout as well, in devastating fashion. And actually, no, I'm sorry, TKO second round. Third fight, LeVar Johnson versus Pat Barry. I know you're a Pat Barry fan. Do I even have to ask?
I'm going to have to agree with go with Pat Barry on this one, of course. He's electric. He's a fun fighter to watch. He's going to put it all out there, whether he gets knocked out or not, a la Czech Congo. So I think it's going to be a stand-up war, and I think it's all going to depend on if Pat Barry can find his range. He's had a tough time kind of sizing up his larger opponents. He's kind of undersized, doesn't have the same reach as some of his bigger heavyweights in the division. So it's going to depend on that, I believe.
You just said it right there. LeVar Johnson's just a bigger guy. I mean, I think LeVar Johnson's fist is as big as Pat Barry's head. So I think
That's
LeVar,
a big head.
Yeah, well, he's a big fist. So I think LeVar Johnson is actually this is gonna be a coming out party for LeVar Johnson, and he's gonna go knock out Pat Barry. I think Pat Barry is an exciting fighter. I love the guy, great personality, great for the sport. But at the same time, like you said, he goes out there and throws caution to the wind and just fights, which is exciting, but this is a bad time to do that. He needs to get a better game plan together, and hopefully I know it sounds surprising, Pat, but you need to take it to the ground and surprise us all by taking this fight to the ground. But no, LeVar Johnson has great stand-up. He's a big, strong guy. Knockout LeVar Johnson. First round.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Here first.
First round. We good with round 4, David?
We're good. All right, Brian, round 5, as a customary here on Pound for Pound, is our Pound for Pound selection rankings. And in this episode, we're going to do a full-on Pound for Pound.
I like it.
So who you got?
David, starting off my list for Pound in the UFC, I have Anderson Silva. I mean, this guy has 9 title defenses. He's gone up in weight. He stayed at middleweight. He's only really been in trouble once before, and, that's coming off when he had an injured rib. I mean, this guy's undeniably the best right now in the world, and I don't see anybody coming close to him right now. And that includes Chael Sonnen, who's fighting him next month. Following Anderson Silva, I have George St. Pierre. I know he's hurt right now, but still, George, I mean, what he's done is just undeniably one of the best runs in the UFC. And his will to win, his dedication to the sport and training is just second to none. So I have to go with George St. Pierre second. With his win over Rashad Evans, I got to give it to John Jones. I mean, John had an unbelievable 2011. He fought 2 former champions, and then he beat Rashad this past weekend. So John Jones, I mean, he's for real. I mean, you can't deny, as much as you might hate his technical style, he's for real. He's here to stay, and he is not going anywhere. Following John Jones, I have Jose Aldo. I don't know if this has ever been the case in any other weight division. I think the UFC is literally struggling on who to pick for him to fight next. I mean, I literally don't think they have anybody to pick. I know there's been talk if Dustin Poirier can win, he'll get that next shot. But to be honest, Jose Aldo, is creating problems for the UFC in that they can't match anybody up at that featherweight division against him. He's literally cleared out that division. I mean, he's made people like Mark Hominick, Chad Money Mendez. I mean, these guys have looked rudimentary compared to him. So Jose Aldo is a beast, and I think we'll see him at lightweight soon because that's the only option that I think the UFC has for him.
Our pound-for-pound rankings differ a little bit, Brian. I've actually got George Rush St. Pierre at number 1. Only 6 title defenses, but this guy, people claim is a boring fighter to watch, and that's because he's just so technical and doesn't want to lose. And in that, he trains and finds and exposes the weaknesses in his opponent's game, and in doing so, makes it like a boring fight. But that doesn't mean that he's not one of the best. And in my case, I think he's pound for pound the best. Right behind him, obviously, Anderson Silva, greatest fighter at middleweight of all time, and arguably the greatest fighter of all time. So technical, exciting to watch most of the time, Damian Maia exception. But besides that, he's an excellent fighter, fun, and definitely right behind. It's 1 and 1A almost between George and Anderson. Behind those two, coming off this impressive win against Rashad Evans, John Jones, very technical, his length is just troubling to all his opponents. I think it's going to keep being that way until he possibly moves up to heavyweight, where some guys have a little bit longer reach. Behind John Jones, Junior Dos Santos. Looks like he's great all around. That fight against Kane was awesome. His boxing is just superb, and I think he's going to continue to showcase that against Frank Mir, even though I did predict Frank Mir.
We have that on record. We do have a little differences, but nonetheless, I think the same names are there. These guys are just great talents in the UFC.
Are we good?
We're good. David, hit that music. Well, that does it for us here at Pound for Pound. Brian and David, another great show, another great time. Thanks for joining us. Join us next time as we will visit the results of UFC on Fox 3 as well as give our predictions for UFC 146. David, anything you'd like to say to the fans?
As usual, later days, fight fans. And until next time, keep your tips up.
Follow us on Twitter at _pound for pound _. See you cage side.
So, Brian, you go to Coachella last weekend?
I didn't, but I heard about the hologram. That looked like some seriously cool stuff.
Leave it to Dr. Dre, right?
Right, yep. I mean, West Coast is back, I guess you could say.
The West Coast rap never left, did it?
I thought it did for a little bit.